So this is the car network for the city of Gouda. The city of Gouda is around 100,000 people, and they have a very old city center, as you can see, graded in yellow. And this car network, these are the main arterials that feed cars from all the different neighborhoods towards the motorway, which is on the north and the western side of the city. As you can see, they've created kind of an alternative ring road around the city, and you can access each of the neighborhoods only from that ring road. So you're really attracting people out of the neighborhood, where the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit is valid, towards those bigger arterials to feed into the motorway system. The cycle network, however, is completely different from the car network. So they've really disconnected the cycle network from the car network by creating a very finely meshed cycle network that cuts straight through the city in all directions, ensuring that traveling by bike is often faster than by car, because you don't have to go around to go to the ring road to reach other neighborhoods. The cycle route connection through the city is often the most direct and the shortest route possible. So to make this work, to make traffic calming work at a network level, there's 4 steps. The first one is to evaluate and prioritize your existing heavy traffic networks. So making sure that you pick and choose a particular road that's suitable and has the capacity to carry a pretty significant volume of car traffic. Then you define your transit network, your freight network, and your car networks to have them individually set. If you have a grid city, this can be difficult because all the roads can be fairly equal in terms of width or available capacity. But it is very important to choose which car networks and transit networks and freight networks are of strategic importance for the city. Then you zoom into the neighborhood level. So from a high-level citywide plan, you zoom a little bit in and you define your key destinations, your key routes and key barriers for people moving around those neighborhoods to ensure that you can still provide an adequate network for people cycling and walking as well. Once you've done that, then you start defining your pedestrian and bicycle networks to ensure that they have the most direct route possible, and creating a separate network that may be sometimes overlapping and sometimes completely separate from the car network. And once all of that is done, then you can start designing the streets to fit the use that you allocated to it. So for example, a street that's on the heavy car network, on the strategic car network, will have to look very differently from a street that's only on the pedestrian and bicycle network, for example. Now in practice, what does it look like? In the city of Amsterdam, the southern part of the city of Amsterdam has a very clearly defined set of networks. This is the car network. Fairly simple, but as you can see, maybe guess by the scale, the mesh width is quite significant. The distance between major arterials, between those strategic corridors for cars, is quite large. And that is because cars can travel quite far. It's not a physical exercise to drive a car. They want to only have that strategic network on the roads that can deal with it. And that helps them to avoid high volumes of cars and high speeds in roads that are not built for it. Then they looked at a transit network, which is a little bit of a finer mesh. You can see that it cuts through the car network in several different points. And afterwards, they start to look at the bike and pedestrian network. And for that, first step is to define some key destinations, for example, education, but also places of employment, places of entertainment. Those are the key places where people will want to ride their bike to and from, and where people will want to walk around in. Making sure you have a good grasp of those places that have a high destination value is one of the key aspects of good network planning that enables good traffic calming. So this is an example of the entertainment network within the southern part of the city of Amsterdam. And once all of that is done, then you can start defining your bike network, connecting those places and the neighborhoods in the most direct way possible. The cars will have to travel around, mostly using the strategic car network, and the bikes will be able to cut through and have them the quickest trip. Defining the pedestrian network can feel a little bit daunting or tricky because pedestrians walk everywhere, but it's mostly depending on which are those key activity hubs. Where do people walk around at night, either going for dinner or going to a bar or restaurant or a cafe, whatever, but also where do people hang out, so in the parks, and how do they connect to and from the surrounding neighborhoods. Dutch people are particularly prone to get on their bike for anything more than half a mile or even less. So making sure that you connect those key destinations to the directly surrounding residential neighborhoods, defines your pedestrian network. Summing it up, the car network has the largest mesh width, between 1,500 up to 4,500 feet. The transit network needs to be a little bit finer meshed because the walking distance toward a transit stop is generally accepted to be fairly short, up to 2,000 feet. Then the bike network, you really want a good bike connection between every 500 and every 1,200 feet, depending on the topography, depending on the type of city, and depending on what type of facility you provide at these intervals. And then the pedestrian network also depends on how you define what the pedestrian network looks like, but needs to have a fairly similar mesh width as the cycle network, up to 1,200 feet.